It was Aviation Day, 1947, at Moscow's Tushino airfield. The crowds had gathered to witness an impressive spectacle, and the U.S. military attachés and several other Western powers were also excited to see the Soviet aircraft. The event was going well until something caught the attention of the American personnel. 3 colossal aircraft were approaching the crowd, and they looked just like their own B-29 Superfortress, the world's most potent strategic bomber until then. Some thought that Joseph Stalin might have refused to return the B-29s that had landed on Soviet territory during World War II. However, their jaws dropped when they saw a 4th one approaching and joining the formation. In reality, the Soviets had successfully replicated the B-29 bomber and developed the Tu-4 Bull, and Stalin now had a fleet of long-range bombers capable of dropping nuclear bombs over all of Western Europe and the United States. A lacking fleet. When World War II broke out, the Soviet Air Force had a formidable aircraft fleet, and although many of their warships were already outdated, they were still powerful. As part of the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, the United States began providing the Soviet Union with all types of war assets and supplies so that it could keep fighting the invincible German army. The US provided fighters, transport aircraft, and medium bombers, and such help was critical to saving Stalin from falling at the hands of the Third Reich. By early 1945, the Soviets had amassed over 15,000 aircraft to decimate the weakened Luftwaffe, but Stalin still wanted more. His air fleet lacked strategic bombing capabilities, and he only had about 30 outdated 4-engine PE-8 bombers to attempt bombing raids over Germany. The Soviet leader was impressed with the bombing capabilities of the US and the Royal Air Force, and strongly desired to emulate the power of the world's most potent bomber ever developed, the B-29 Superfortress. Gifts from heaven. Stalin had first heard of the legendary B-29 Superfortress from the American ace Eddie Rickenbacker, who visited the Soviet Union in 1942. Although the B-29 would make its debut during the bombing of Bangkok in 1944, an insistent Stalin requested over 120 aircraft several times, but his petitions were always ignored. Lend-Lease officials were unwilling to share the most lethal bomber of all time with a nation that had become hostile to the West. However, as destiny would have it, the Russian dictator would be gifted with several B-29s in the most unexpected ways. On July 29, 1944, a B-29 Superfortress dubbed Ramp Tramp was forced to land at Vladivostok after a successful raid on Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Captain Howard R. Jarrell and his crew were having electrical problems, and they had no option but to land on Soviet territory. The crew was then interrogated and taken to the facilities where other American pilots were retained. Meanwhile, Ramp Tramp was grounded and inspected by the Soviets. Almost 4 months later, General H. Hap Arnold had to land his B-29 in Vladivostok after a raid against Omura on Kyushu. Soon, another B-29, the Ding Hao, diverted to the exact same location after attacking Japan. And a 4th aircraft, Kate Palmat II, crashed days later. Stalin could not be happier. 4 of the world's most potent bombers had landed on his doorstep, and he would not let them be taken away from him, whatever the cost. Despite the incessant American claims to return the bombers, Stalin argued that he had to retain them to maintain the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact, signed in April of 1941. Returning the pilots. The US put enormous diplomatic pressure on Stalin to force him to return the more than 300 American pilots under Soviet custody. Stalin agreed to return them all under his own terms. To avoid a direct confrontation with the Japanese Empire, the USSR would transfer them discreetly from Siberia to Central Asia. The men were then repatriated to British-controlled territory in Iran, but not before interrogating the B-29 crews about their aircraft. All the crew members were asked about their role aboard the bomber and how it functioned. This was nothing new, given Soviet policy. Ever since the Doolittle raid in 1942, every Allied pilot that landed on Soviet-controlled territory was interrogated. Still, despite repatriating the airmen, the Soviet Union refused to return the B-29s, alleging that they were not in conditions to be taken to the skies. The dictator was not yet prepared to fight the Japanese and risk losing the fight on two fronts. Meanwhile, the US kept putting pressure on the immediate return of the B-29s, but Stalin had other plans in mind. By the time the Allied forces began to push toward Germany in early 1945, conflicts of interest had risen between the Western nations and the USSR, starting the end of friendly relations with the United States. Soviet reverse engineering. Before acquiring the 4 American B-29s, the Soviet Air Force had begun developing a similar long-range bomber, capable of performing similar strategic bombing raids led by the US and the Royal Air Force on the Western Front. Stalin had personally chosen renowned engineer A.N. Tupolev to create this new aircraft, simply known as Airplane Project 64. Tupolev began preliminary studies in August of 1944, but made little progress designing the bombers from scratch. However, with the requisition of the American B-29 bombers, Stalin instead gave the order to build an exact replica in early 1945. The American aircraft had to be replicated to the last detail. Consequently, the 3 operational B-29s were flown to the Izmailovo airfield outside Moscow to be inspected and transferred to the 65th Special Mission Air Regiment. Air Marshal Alexander Golovanov then personally analyzed the aircraft to see if it was possible to create a replica with the resources the Soviet Union had at its disposal. Meanwhile, Admiral Nikolai G. Kuznetsov, the People's Commissar for Naval Affairs and commander of the Soviet Navy, was ordered to begin flight tests with Ramp Tramp, the first B-29 that landed on Soviet soil. Kuznetsov chose Lieutenant Colonel Semyov Borisovich Rydel to personally fly the aircraft. He was a seasoned engineer and pilot, but more importantly, he spoke English, something that was of immense value to understanding the manuals and functions of the B-29. Once Rydel and his men finished the reports about the aircraft's essential components, including detailed information on the pressurized crew compartments, the radar, instruments, electronics, and the use of lightweight aluminum alloys, Stalin ordered Tupolev to get to work. The copycat program was named B-4, for bomber with 4 engines. Stalin warned Tupolev and his crew that even the slightest deviations from the original B-29s could result in an execution. However, the reverse engineering process had to be taken with extreme precaution to prevent an unfortunate accident. Tupolev then began assessing the aircraft to decide which one would be completely dismantled. Disassembling the B-29. The chosen B-29 was the General H.H. Arnold Special because it was named after the patron of the B-29, the Army Air Force's Chief General H.H. Hap Arnold. Ramp Tramp would continue serving as a test platform. Ding Hao was grounded as a backup reference, and the damaged Cape Palmat II would be used to scavenge for pieces. The first problem the Soviets encountered was using the metric system, as the Americans measured everything with the imperial. The issue escalated when creating the aluminum parts of the B-29's airframe, as each one had to be individually analyzed to determine its strength requirements. Additionally, thousands of technicians were involved in making the perfect replica of even the smallest pieces, including screws, and several materials were also reverse engineered to study their composition. Tupolev and Soviet government officials closely monitored the quality of each individual piece to ensure every component was compatible with the others. Stalin had mobilized the entire Soviet industry to produce the perfect replica of the B-29, and it became a monumental effort for the whole nation. Another complex task was replicating the electronics, radar, and navigation equipment used by the Americans. However, Tupolev managed to do it without invoking the wrath of Stalin. Besides, he received approval to make some changes to certain components, that could not be easily replicated or acquired, such as the engines, machine guns, and navigation systems. In one such instance, Tupolev used the Shvetsov ASH-73TK engine, which was similar to the B-29's Wright R-3350 engine. Also, the 50 caliber American machine guns were replaced by Soviet 23mm cannons. In the summer of 1946, the first mock-up of the B-4 bomber was finished and renamed the Tupolev Tu-4. An unexpected surprise. Tupolev's Tu-4 was almost an exact replica of the B-29. The aircraft was a mid-wing, 4-engine medium bomber with the same two bomb bays at the center of the fuselage. The only noticeable physical difference was the use of the Soviet Red Star and the 4 Soviet cannons. While the Tu-4 was being built, Tupolev began designing the Tu-70, a passenger version. The first Tu bomber was finally delivered in February of 1947, months before Stalin's 2-year limit ended. More bombers followed during the following months, and training crews prepared to show them during the August Moscow Air Show. The Western Allies were able to see the Tu-4 for the first time during the event. At first, the American attachés believed the aircraft were their lost B-29s, except for being repainted. However, the sight of the 4th Tu bomber was an immediate red flag, leading to the realization that the USSR had replicated the B-29. The Tu-4 was codenamed Bull by NATO, and even though it never saw actual combat, it was used to airdrop the 3rd Soviet atomic bomb in October of 1951. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels to find more exciting historical content. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of our newest videos. Also, let us know in the comments below what you think of this copycat version of the iconic B-29 strategic bomber. And stay tuned for more.